and thanks for joining us on Relational Practice, a social work podcast. I'm Dr. Jodie Parr.
I'm Mackey, and we are both private practice social workers who work in the fields of out-of-home care, child protection and trauma. And we're in New South Wales, Australia. And today we're recording on Dharawal land, and our guest is on Dharawal land.
We'll introduce our guest very soon. But thank you for listening, and we would love for you to subscribe, rate and review our podcast and connect with us on Facebook, Instagram and via our new YouTube page and also our new webpage, which is kind of exciting. We'll be adding content and videos to all of our platforms regularly. Oh, our new webpage is called Relational Practice, asocialworkpodcast.com.au. So please check it out. Have a look. You can contact us via there, like I said before, and we will be putting resources and printables and all sorts on there.
And links up to the episodes and
Hopefully.
all those things.
Yeah. And as always, please send us any practice stories, questions or comments to relationalpractice01@gmail.com or via any of those kind of other ways that I just said you could contact us. Basically, just contact us. All right.
Jodie will get back to you all.
Eventually, yes.
So in today's episode, we welcome a guest, someone who believes that the most powerful tool in any practitioner's toolkit isn't a resource guide or a referral form, but it is the ability to truly hear what isn't being said. Ross Judd has a master's degree in communication management and extensive training in neuro-linguistic programming. He has spent his entire career working as a successful leader, a leadership coach, a consultant, and he's always been motivated by the fact that the concepts he teaches help people also in their personal lives. Ross's leadership coaching has often been focused on personal issues like self-esteem and limiting beliefs. Ross Judd is the author of Listening, a guide to building deeper connections. While Ross is a renowned expert in organizational culture, his mission is also deeply personal. Motivated by a commitment to suicide prevention and mental health awareness, Ross is dedicated to uncovering why we struggle to connect. For those of us on the front lines, whether that's child protection, aged care, disability, education, crisis intervention, you know that our clients often test the waters before they trust us with their stories. Mm-hmm. So today we have Ross on to talk us through his life work on listening, and will help us understand how we break through the barriers, avoid the fix-it trap, and build the kind of radical empathy that changes lives. Welcome, Ross.
Welcome, Ross.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here. Very pleased.
Well, we're very pleased to have you.
Yeah, thanks. I feel somewhat humbled because I think the work that you and your listeners do is so important and challenging. So I feel a bit humbled to be here, to be honest.
Oh, well, thank you. But don't feel humbled. Your work is amazing, and we're really thankful for you for spending time with us to talk about your work. Would you like to start there? Would you like to tell us a little bit about your book and tell us a little bit about your work?
Yeah, I'd love to. And I have great pride in the book. It was a bit of work to write, obviously, and it's the product of decades. So I started my own business as a consultant back in the late 90s. And I was lucky enough to be introduced to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective, a program that a guy called Stephen Covey put out, and he had a habit on listening. And I grabbed hold of that habit and I thought about it, and seek first to understand is what the habit was called, and then to be understood. And that presented a whole bunch of ideas in my mind about we have to, the importance of listening. Then I had an incident. What drove me to write the book was 2 incidents. One was a moment with my daughter where she clearly wanted to talk about something. She was what I call loitering in the doorway of my office. I was working and she just sort of hung around, and that was very unusual. She would normally come in, take over, etc. So in that, to cut a long story short, I made a conscious decision to follow what I'd learned in the 7 Habits, which was let them talk, and only summarize what they're saying. And so I consciously decided to do that. She started talking about problems at school. She talked about children being mean to her. My fix-it dad brain went off. I wanted to go and confront everybody and sort that out, but I had to keep to what I was trying to do, which was to not say anything, let her talk, just summarize what she's saying. And through that conversation, what actually evolved was that there was a deeper issue, and the deeper issue was her relationship with her mother. And that became very evident. And I could tell that became so important because her behavior changed when that came up. She became very nervous, very worried. And then I was really able to just listen and listen and listen and listen. And and in my world, that means you don't say anything.
Mhm.
You don't correct them. You don't tell them how to fix the problem. You don't do any of those things that we're naturally programmed to do.
Mm.
And those things are fine in normal conversations, but not in this conversation. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I was able to help with that issue.
Great.
Now, she was about 10 at the time. She's now in her mid to late 20s. Don't ask me the exact number. Um, and yeah, I've thought ever since then a big what if. What if she had not got that connection that she needed in that moment with me? She was 10 roughly years old. Where would she have gone? Because she needed something.
Mm.
She wasn't going to go to her mother because that was where the nervousness was. Would she have gone to YouTube? Would she have gone to to her friends? But she then talked about friends being mean. Like, where would she have gone? And that question stuck with me for a long, long time and eventually prompted me to write the book because I think as parents, if we can grab those moments when they occur, then we can make a massive difference. And we can make a massive difference later in their life. And for her going through her teen years, she did a podcast with a friend for a couple of years. And during that, she talked quite openly about feeling anxiety and being anxious. And she's just a naturally worrying type of person. She worries about a lot of things. And imagine someone not having the connection with her mother and her father that she needs when she's anxious, when she's worrying, when she's,
Yeah.
I just, the big what if just keeps going through my head. So it prompted me to write the book. The book became a much bigger project than I expected, took longer than I expected. But it's something I'm very, very proud of.
Mm.
And you mentioned, if we're okay, I'll just mention one more thing.
Yeah, of course.
Um, in the book, that what if question kept worrying me, and I made links. I realized it's a long bow to draw. Is that the expression? It's a long way from somebody being a little bit worried about something to somebody thinking about suicide. But I made that link. If they don't get the answers they need, do they start to feel alone? Do they start to feel isolated? Do they start to feel like there's no one that supports them? And then where can that go? And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I got very nervous about that. And I was doing some leadership coaching on a mine site, and they asked me to coach one particular guy and let me know that he'd lost his daughter to suicide in her teens, only about 6 months before. And so I'm going in to coach this guy, and he's looking at, and miners are typically suspicious. So he's looking at me with suspicion, and I'm looking at him like, I don't know what to do. And so I just said that to him. I don't know what to do. They've told me, your story, your background. So you tell me what I should do. And he then just started talking.
Mm.
And so I just went into listening, 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 listening. I don't have an opinion on this. I cannot know how that feels. So I'll just let him talk. Eventually, I plucked up the courage to say, would you read this book and tell me if that link that I'm drawing is too much of a link
Mm.
from your perspective, then tell me. I need to know. And he actually came back and wrote the foreword for the book and supported the book wholeheartedly. And through that collaboration with him, we're now donating proceeds from book sales to Beyond Blue. So it had, he really strengthened the link, if anything, through his experience. So there's a lot in there, and it's probably all a bit heavy. Apologize for starting on a heavy note.
That's
But
okay.
that's sort of where this all came from, and that's why I'm so passionate about the book.
Yeah, right. I mean, I love those two stories and how they've motivated you into action. And
Yeah.
I think it would have been so scary when you actually got that guy to read your book. You must have
Yeah.
been like, "Oh, what if he just thinks, no, this is all rubbish. You got to start again." Like I would have been really worried about that. So good on you for your courage, because I think at the end of the day, it kind of did strengthen. It sounds like it did strengthen
Yeah.
everything you were trying to actually convey.
Yeah, it did. And it's classic, as you said that. I'm thinking if you knew miners, they just love to take any opportunity. So when he came back to tell me he'd read it, and he came back and said, all right. Yeah, he was very laconic about it. And he was clearly setting me up with all of my insecurities, to play with them.
Yeah.
And his whole demeanor was, I was thinking I'm about to cop it from this guy, and then he's like, "Yeah, that was really hard to read. I'm cutting out some of his language, but I've got to be honest." And I'm thinking, yeah. And then he's like, "It has to be read. It has to be read." Like, it was hard to read for me as a parent, but it has to be, yeah, what you've written is important. So I'm like, whew. So it actually went from feeling very nervous and all of my insecurities coming through to, wow, thank you. And he and I have formed quite a bond over the project, because I think I did that 5 years ago or more, 5 or 6 years ago. I'll lose track of time because of COVID. It's like the blip we lose. Anyway.
Definitely the blip. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think his feedback around it must be read and everyone should read this. I think that's great. Isn't that great feedback?
Yeah, it was really good. And it really helped.
Yeah.
It helped me. Yeah.
So Ross, you've worked extensively in the leadership space, and obviously there's sections in your book where you talk about your daughter and that moment where she was loitering in your office. So I guess my takeaway is that whether you're a parent, a leader, or even just a welfare worker, a practitioner in the fields of welfare, that the book can assist people to really deepen their listening skills and understand the art, I guess, in social work language, I think we call it active listening, but really you talk about deep listening for connection. What kind of advice would you give practitioners in welfare around the art of listening?
Thanks, and great question. And I'm very conscious as I answer that I'm not in their field, and in my mind, I think they've got a tough job. I think what they're doing is hard. And my first piece of advice is actually not what you might expect, because the first piece of advice is not to do this all the time, because it's exhausting. And you've got to concentrate, and you've got to stop your internal mind making all of this noise so you can listen and summarize. It's hard work. So the first piece of advice is actually learn to recognize the moment. And you will know, your practitioners who are with people all the time, and you'll know whether they're just sort of trying to get your attention and they're just trying to get, something that, and you can help them, and you don't need to be quite as deep and serious. And then you'll get a sense, you'll have a sixth sense that there's a deeper issue here. And I think when you recognize that there's a genuine deeper issue, then you need to switch it on.
I 100% agree with that, Ross, because I think it's always about a time and a place, and it's also about the context. Yes. Because there'd be some situations or some scenarios where it wouldn't be appropriate to be doing that kind of active listening. And I mean, in kind of child protection speak, what you're also talking about is it's a reparative strategy, and it's about, what's it called? Can't remember what it's called.
The reparative strategy.
Yeah. It is this kind of a strategy that is around building that relationship, that relational connection, because of the process of deep listening. But it's also around following the lead. So you're not directing the conversation, you're actually just following the lead. And you can't do that in every scenario because it wouldn't be appropriate. So I 100% agree with you around read the time, read the context, think about whether this is the right time and space for you, but also for the person.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I talk about is if it's not the right time and place, but you've got a sense, the example I'll keep using the example with my daughter. As you were asking the question, I was thinking about in the leadership context, I use different examples. And in the leadership context, I actually think it happens more. And this idea of, and what I'm talking about there is this idea of people don't tell you the real issue. They never tell you the real issue. And that's a mantra I would encourage people to always have in their mind, even practitioners, even when, you're in that relationship, I'd still be thinking to myself, this is not the real issue. This is not the real issue. And in the example with Emily, it was such a classic example where it followed the pattern. I can remember thinking this is not the real issue, but I got no idea what the real issue might be. So, because the real issue can be very strangely connected. Like in their mind, it's a neurological connection, not a logical one. So anyway, so that idea of there's always a deeper issue. I think it happens more in business. I think in business they skirt across things and don't actually tell you the real issue. Now that'll be a business issue, but for lots of reasons, because they've got their career, their reputation, their ego, their income, their all of that attached. So they skirt around and lie, basically. So I think it happens more in business, but I'm sure it's happening in practitioner settings, and I'm sure you're not getting the deeper issues straight away. And there is then that moment. And if I go back to where I started, if you're not in a position to actually give them the attention, then I would encourage, be honest with them about that. This is not the right time or place. If that deeper issue, they've thought about it for a while, and you saying to them, like if Emily came and I was working and I was like, hey, can I chat to you in half an hour? She'll wait half an hour because she's been thinking about it for how long? And it's the same with them. If you can say to them, let's have this conversation, it'll be a better setting for us, or whatever it is, whatever the reason is that you need to delay it, let them know, I'm with you. I want to be there. I want to hear this. I just can't do it right now. They'll wait a little bit longer because they've already waited.
Yeah, I agree. It's about having that open communication. And I think the thing about people don't often talk about what the actual issue is. They talk about something else. I mean that because I think there's a lot of trust that's required for that open communication to occur.
Yeah.
And I think, the same way that Emily was trusting you with kind of how are you going to respond, our clients do that all of the time.
Yeah.
They see how they kind of try and work up to what might be the actual issue because they're waiting to see what are we going to do with the lesser stuff.
Yeah. And I call it an audition. That's how I framed it.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely an audition. The whole issue with the school, kids being mean to Emily at school, absolutely an audition, because every idea. So my mantra in those situations, there's a process that I've outlined in the book. It's a 7-step process. I put it into an acronym. It starts off with recognizing the opportunity. Then you need to engage. Then you need to summarize. You can call it active listening, paraphrasing, all the same sort of thing. Summarize what they are saying. But the mantra in all of that is do not venture an opinion. Do not try to fix the problem. Do not try to tell them how whatever it is, or don't share your life story. You can't do any of our normal things that we like to do. I notice the older I get, the more I love sharing my life stories. I'm like, oh, I had an experience like that. And then I'm like, oh, hang on, that's probably not what they want to hear right now.
And that's something that in social work in particular, we talk a lot about in social work education around the difference between kind of what's appropriate to share and what's not, because sometimes lived experience is important to share, but is it important to share in that scenario? So it is always about reading the context, reading the room, basically.
Read the situation.
Could you talk sorry, I was going to say whether you do it now, because I think I cut you off. Could you talk about your process?
So the 7 steps, if you want to keep it simple, I keep it to just 3. The first is recognize the opportunity. The second is engage with that person. And then the third is summarize what they're saying. That's not the full process, but if you just want to keep it simple, keep it to 3. And this is similar. Recognize the opportunity, engage with that person, and then you need to open up the conversation. So you actually need to let them talk, because the rule is you can't talk. It's so hard for people to get that. And so this idea of opening up the conversation, quite often they'll have only said, very short sentences, and that's very hard to summarize. So you need a neutral way to get them to open up. And so I just encourage people to use phrases like "tell me more," or a question along those lines. Anything else? It's just something like that just is neutral and encourages them to keep talking and filling in the gaps. So then you get to the point where hopefully they're now saying more and you can summarize what they're saying. And then there's a point that I call a transition. And this is what I was getting to earlier. in my hard and fast rule is I can't offer an opinion until we get to the transition point. And the transition point is marked by the fact that they ask for one. So the transition point is simply, in the example with my daughter Emily, we got to the point where she was like, Dad, what do you think I should do? And what I was going to say, the audition, I was talking about that whole issue because when she asked, I then offered some suggestions because now I can actually go to actions. So that's the next step. So then I suggested, well, what about talking to your teachers? She'd thought about that. She didn't think that was a good idea. She thought it might actually make it worse. What about confronting them? She had confronted them. She'd actually spoken to them about it and they didn't really understand what she was on about. And, it was anyway. So, and then what about making new friends? She'd done that as well. So I'm now hearing, I've come up with 3 options. And I'm like, you've already done all 3. This clearly was not the deeper issue because you're on top of it. You have already actioned and you're on it. So the way that the suggestion came up with my wife was, I'm scrambling for ideas and I'm like, well, why don't we ask your mother? She's smarter than me anyway. So let's get her opinion. And Emily reacted badly. No. Please, don't ask mum. Don't tell mum. Don't bring mum into this. And then it was like, I'm right back at the start. And I'm now back to recognize the situation. This is serious because very emotional. And I've got to engage, open up the conversation, summarize, no talking, and then wait for a transition where she asks, Dad, what do you think I should do? And even then, she asked the transition question. And I said, well, I think we need to tell your mum. No, we can't do that. So I've got to go back again, go back through. And eventually I suggested, how about I talk to your mum? I can remember Emily saying, what, how about I talk to your mum on your behalf? Oh, do you think you can? And I almost laughed because it was just, knowing what I know about her mum, it was a no-brainer. But she still had that nervousness. Do you think you can? So the final step in the process, so the acronym's R.E.O.S.T.A.R, and the final R is what I called the real issue check. So you've gone through all of this, you've done some actions, it may or may not have been. So if in the example with Emily, the deeper issue came up accidentally because I suggested, let's talk to your mum, and there it was. But if it hadn't come up accidentally, I then would have done a check and just said, is there anything is there something else troubling you? Because I would have known because she was on top of all those other actions, we still hadn't got to the deeper issue. So hopefully that checkpoint then draws out the deeper issue, or would have seen a reaction. Is there anything else you want to talk about? She would have got nervous. She would have got hesitant. And I would have been like, okay, do you want to talk about that? Whatever that is. So is that making sense? It's a 7-step process. It's actually, the example with Emily is I use it because it followed that process so effectively. And each step is outlined in the book.
So Ross, can I ask, the recognizing, was that Emily was loitering at your office door? That's when you recognized that?
Yeah. So the most common triggers, and I talk about, they give you hints. And the most common hints are their behavior is different in some way. So the loitering in the doorway was very different behavior. So that suggested, or they just, and if they're hesitant or uncertain, I think of that as different behavior. If there's emotion, so if they get emotional about the topic, then that could be, it's not always, but it could be a hint and a trigger. And the first one I talk about is if they ask. Yeah, quite often they'll say, have you got a minute? That could be code for, actually, I need more than a minute. It could be code for, I need a bit of your time. So they're the 3 biggest ones, but I think I've got 7 or 8, or I forget how many in the book itself. There are other smaller ones, but you could kind of group them into that bracket.
Can I just also ask about when you talk about summarizing, and what is the, I guess, end goal of the summarizing stage?
Beautiful question. The end goal is to demonstrate understanding. And that's what I took from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. He talks about faithful translation. He gave it his own term. Yeah. And the whole point was demonstrate understanding. And in my experience and in my training and everything, there is no other way of demonstrating understanding other than whatever technique you like, summarizing, faithful translation. active listening, paraphrasing, reflective listening, any of those terms, the idea of them is to repeat back what they've said in your own words as a way of demonstrating that you understood. And the big caution to people is watch out for that expression, I understand. Because most of the time, the person on the other end of that is thinking, no, you don't. Or that's certainly how I think. Someone says to me, I understand. I'm like, you haven't heard a word I've said. So.
Yeah, that's something that's very early taught in counseling skills, that you don't, that's a question you don't say.
Yeah, great.
I understand that, because you don't, because you can't, because you're not living that life.
I also think if you have the art of really listening for connection, and that summarizing is the only way that I know to turn my internal solution focused or context and history, or whatever it may be that often is running at the same time, to turn that off is to actually be thinking, I have to summarize this back or reflect this back. And that's one way that helps me turn off my internal dialogue to actually make me present with clients. And I think that's really such a helpful tool, because it puts you, that people will talk about sitting side by side, direct eye contact. There's so much writing about active listening, but the one thing about summarizing back is that, at least for me, I struggle to have other dialogue running through my head at the same time.
You and I are very similar in that. And in fact, the reason I chose summarizing as my expression, one is it turned into a nice acronym, but the main reason is because I'm exactly like you just described. For me to really concentrate and hear what they're saying, I've got to turn off my inner voice. And the biggest challenge, so the best way I found to do that is to really focus on what they're saying. And I'm constantly summarizing it in my head as they're talking, so I can repeat it back to them. It's interesting because I talk about the two biggest barriers to effective, deep communication. May not, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, may not be what other people think, but for me, the two biggest barriers are this whole issue of how to quiet your inner voice. Because most of the time, your inner voice is the only thing you hear. Your inner voice can run at, neurologists tell us it can run at roughly 10 times the speed that someone can talk. So the inner dialogue is one of the biggest barriers. And the other big barrier is the fact that they don't tell you the real issue. And when you combine those two, it's really hard. It's really hard to actually have deep and meaningful conversations.
I mean, I think another barrier is that rushing to action, particularly if you are time poor, resource poor, you're listening to your own inner voice rather than prioritizing the conversation you're having. You're gonna be sitting there thinking, I know how to solve this. Why do I have to sit and listen to this for 10 minutes? I know how to solve this. Just do this. And I think that stepping back and being quiet and actually using active listening skills to promote that trusting environment so that the conversation goes, so that you actually get to the true issue, I think is really hard and really tricky for people.
The inner voice encompasses a lot of issues, and probably the biggest for most people, because their training in life has led them to be like that, is they hear a thing and they want to and start fixing. And the big problem with that is you could just be fixing something that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So if I'd launched in to fix the problem at school, I probably would have made it worse, and it didn't matter. And it's not what Emily wanted. So we do need to be careful. And it comes back to recognize the moment first. There'll be times in your life he talks about something and they do want you to fix it. This is what makes life your life, where somebody starts talking to you about something and they don't want you to fix it. They actually want you to listen and go deeper. So learning, I actually think the most important skill in all of this is that learning to recognize the difference and learning to, and the minute you can do that, you can then be conscious about the decisions that you make. And if you've got that recognition, you can then make a conscious decision. And in my experience, the only way to do this is to be conscious. So if you want, because I'm a consultant and I give people advice in 30 something years, and it's easy for me to, Emily can come along and talk and I can give her advice. That's easy. And it's natural and it's habitual. But recognizing that moment and being able to stop myself doing that is what I would encourage for people. I don't have any great answers other than you've got to consciously stop yourself talking.
Yeah, you do. I
Now,
know. Yeah, sorry.
sorry, I'll share a funny story.
Mm-hmm.
So I got good at doing that. I got good at stopping myself talking. And then Emily in her teens came to me and said, "Oh, Dad, can I talk to you about blah, blah, blah?" So she laid out this problem that she wanted help with. And I'm thinking it was a serious problem. So I had to think about it, and I took too long. And she's like, "Dad, this is not one of those moments where you go all quiet and you wait for me to solve it myself. I want your opinion." I'm like, okay, sorry.
She knew what you were doing.
She spotted the pattern.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you can make it a bit of a habit. You can make the listening a habit if you do it often enough. But to get there, it's got to be a conscious. I cut you off.
I was going to say, I think in counseling in particular, what what we're taught is that people have their own answers. And sometimes when you rush to action, you actually disempower them, because promoting empowerment is about helping people to actually come up with answers themselves to the problems that they're facing, because that's how you actually promote someone living well in the world, because without there being the need for there to be this crutch for them. It's about also kind of developing mastery over their own life and over their own decisions. So our role, I think, as social workers is always about helping people to live in the world in a safe way. And one of the ways that you do that is by helping people to develop the skills, but also the confidence to know that they actually can make good choices for themselves. So
yeah, aligned on that. In neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, it's built on a whole bunch of presuppositions or beliefs. People have all the resources they need. It's just a matter of access. They just need to access, and what they need from us as a coach.
Yes.
And in coaching, one of my mantras has been, I'm not here to give solutions, I'm here to give. And then they can make decisions. And a lot of the time, particularly in leadership work, what I'm trying to do is get that person out of habitual patterns and more conscious about what they're doing so they can make a choice. Because so much of what we do is just habitual and we're not making choices, and it just happens. And so we yell at somebody, or we, whatever it might be, or we get upset about whatever it is. And if we stopped and give ourselves a minute or whatever it is that we need, and then make a choice, would we make a different choice? And that's a lot of, for me as a coach, and in NLP, it's a lot of our, what drives us is they have the resources. We're there to help them access resources. We're there to help them find that within themselves.
Oh my God, social work 101, Ross.
So similar.
How about that?
Because that habitualness can become dependency on workers or agencies from our clients if we continue to rush in to solve problems.
But also, sorry, I was going to say, a dependency on just having negative thoughts about yourself. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
And even that, I would say, is habitual, like the negative thoughts about yourself. And I should know, because my mother will never listen to this podcast. I have the most negative person in the world as a mother, and it's habitual. Like I'll suggest something, and I know what I'm going to hear. I will hear all of the negative reasons why that, Mum, why don't you come out to our house? And I'll get all the negative reasons why that's not going to work, because this will happen, that'll happen, whatever. Those sorts of things. I mean, the point there is our thinking patterns are habitual as well. They become habits, and changing those habits, again, the only way I know is to actually consciously make the change.
Yeah, I agree. But it really goes back to, if we go back to your model, it really is about recognizing, really. I know. What does your R stand for again?
Yeah, recognize.
Yeah, recognizing.
The first R. Yep.
Yeah. I think that goes back to that.
There's also, if I can, as I wrote the book, one of the things that challenged me was, how do we help people get out of their bad habits and actually do this? And I thought a lot about the work I'd done in leadership, and I've been in that space trying to help leaders change their bad habits, et cetera, for decades. And the first section of the book is actually well, technically it's the second section. So the first section is all about why this is so important. Then the second section is my approach to helping people change their habits and change their habitual routines. And I've been working with a model from an NLP, one of the people who was very influential in NLP, very in the early days, a guy called Robert Dilts. I've always worked with his model, which talks about the deeper levels of change that we need to work at. And we need to work on someone's beliefs, and we need to work at their not we, but they need to work at their identity level, and even their purpose. What's their greater purpose? And as I worked through all of that, I realized that there's a link between that and values. So I've combined his work with and turned them all into values and started using that with clients to see how, and I found it to be phenomenally effective at helping people think through. So there's 5 levels, and the idea is if there's something that you want to achieve, you need to think about the outcome and what you value most at the outcome level. Then you need to think about the behavior that you will need to value most to achieve that outcome. And then you need to think about your thinking patterns, your thoughts, your beliefs, the thoughts that go through your mind. What will you need to think to achieve that outcome? And then who will you need to be to achieve that outcome? And then why? Why is this so important to you? What's the bigger reason? I call it greater purpose values. What's your greater purpose for that? And why does it matter so much? Now, some people have worked through that. They like to go through it the other way. They like to start with a big purpose and then think about who they need to be. What am I going to need to think? What's the behavior I'll need? And then actually, what's the outcome I'm looking for here? That's not as important as my big purpose. So you can go through it whichever direction. I've had other people just jump all over the place. But that process of the 5, and there's a whole section of the book dedicated to it. So it's a big chunk of the book. And that process of working through those 5 levels, I found to be very effective because it gets you to think completely about what is it I'm trying to do here. And in the context of the book, I'm using it to help people change their habits as listeners. And in the context of listening, what's the outcome that you're trying to achieve? Hopefully it's demonstrating understanding. Okay, well then what's the behavior I'm going to need to adopt? Well, I'll need to adopt summarizing or active listening or paraphrasing, whatever you call it. Now, what am I going to need to think? I'm probably going to need to think their opinion is more valuable than mine, or something like that. Or I need to hear what they're saying. And who do I need to be? And that when you line it all, and why does this matter to me? Why do I want to achieve this? When you line all of that up, it becomes very powerful.
Yeah, I think it would be very, very powerful.
Yeah, it's like a holistic kind of roadmap to where we are and where we need to get to, but also the steps through. But I also like that it can be either way, because for some people, the why, is the most important to start with, and for others, it's what does the end result look like. So I like that it's interchangeable depending on what suits you best. I
often find I'll put it in front of people and I'm like, which level of this is the level that's sabotaging you? So often we actually don't know their why, or they'll know their outcome, but they haven't thought about the mindsets. And so they haven't actually thought about, actually, you're right, I'm thinking all the wrong things. I'm never going to achieve this the way I'm currently thinking. So they've thought about their behaviors, but they haven't thought about their mindsets, or they've thought about, so it's interesting just asking that question of which level of this. The identity level is a hard one for people to think about, because that's asking you to think about who you are. How do you see yourself? And again, that can be one that traps a lot of people. It trips them up. I found it to be very effective. It's actually the thing I'm most proud of in the book. I'm really proud of the R.E.O.S.T.A.R process as well. I'm proud of all of it. Okay.
Well, I mean, you should be proud of it, because it's a great book, and I love the fact that there are some really relatable models in this book that people can just kind of use and run with, really. I think that's great. It's very user-friendly.
Yeah, thank you. And that has been my ambition as a consultant, as a trainer, as a leadership, and in anything I do. And it's actually, I think, something that I'm good at doing is making it simple, making it accessible. Let's just make it something that we can start doing.
I mean, we talk about that in pretty much every episode, don't we? When we talk about theory, we always talk about the fact that we have interpreted a theory in a particular way to make it relatable for us.
Yeah, nice.
And it's kind of the way that you have to, because otherwise, I mean, you can have all these big kind of overarching ideas and these kind of this, you know, this very seemingly far off kind of, I don't know, fundamental value that you think that you need to be able to implement in practice, but it doesn't matter if you don't know how to do that implementation. The way that you do that is by making it make sense for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Ross, I'm wondering, through all your kind of years of research, is there one thing that we commonly get wrong in the listening space?
Only one.
Mm.
I love that you call it research. Thank you for that. Because I think of it as research. You know, I've been out there and I've got it wrong so many times, and I learned from that. And it is research. It's very practical. It's not empirical, but it's practical. Is there just one thing that we get wrong? There's so many things that we get wrong. But if I narrowed it to the one, it would be the inner voice and its influence on what's going on. That inability to, and the inner voice, if I go right back to what I've been saying, is the most important thing here is to recognize the opportunity. You cannot do this all the time. It's exhausting. You cannot do this all the time. When Stephen Covey, we used to show videos of Stephen himself presenting all these concepts, and he's like, you can't do this all the time. Someone comes up and says, I need the bathroom. Oh, you're really hurting right now. You know, like it's like you're not gonna. That little example is always stuck in my mind. I need the bathroom. You're really hurting right now. It's like, I don't need you to summarize my feelings. Just tell me where the bathroom is.
Yeah.
So recognizing the opportunity, or I've called it recognize the opportunity, because it is an opportunity with the people that you care about. Once you do that, the big thing is getting that internal voice and all of the things that it does. I would trace pretty much every problematic behavior back to being driven by the internal voice. So the desire to fix would be right up there in the, top 3 biggest problems. The desire to tell my story, the desire to just give a solution, the desire to give advice, the desire to just talk, the desire to ask questions. You know, we've probably been taught that the best way to get to the issue is to ask questions. So it's got to be asking questions. So you can tell I'm thinking about this on the fly here, can't you? Asking questions would be up in the top 3, because the minute you start asking questions, you redirect that conversation. So you're going to take it offline. I always keep thinking about it as, whose line are we on? Are we on mine or are we on theirs? And if you've recognized the opportunity, you've got to be on their line. And that means no questions. You cannot ask a question.
Because all of what you've just said, Ross, comes from our inner voice, thinking about problems, solutions, asking the questions, thinking this, I've recognized this pattern. You've just got it. All of that is suggesting your inner voice is quite loud.
Very loud. It's the only thing we hear most of the time. It's the thing that drives us. It's the thing. And particularly if they say something you react to emotionally, like if they say anything at all that you have any kind of. So I talk about this, recognizing the opportunity. In the book, I suggest to people, do you want us practicing it in non-committal social settings? Just see what that's like. Just go into a social setting and just summarize and just see what happens. And just because you haven't got skin in the game. So you won't find it as hard. And then once you've done that for a little while, now start doing it when you have got skin in the game, when you're with your partner or somebody you care about and they're saying something that you disagree with. Now have a crack at summarizing what they're saying. And I'll bet you didn't even hear what they said, because your brain went off with what your thoughts are on that topic and you disagree and they're wrong and all blah, 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 and off it goes. So it's when they say something emotive, it gets very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're triggered, aren't you? Like you're instantly triggered, and then you revert back to coping strategies that you rely on when you are triggered internally. So it's about trying to override some of those coping strategies or delay the onset of the coping strategies. What?
I'm just not very good at that all the time at home.
Well, I don't think anyone is good at it all the time.
None of us are.
No, it's about practice, isn't it? I was having this conversation with a little boy just before we started recording, a little boy in the session, about just practice. Just practice. That's all it takes is practice. And sometimes you'll do it and sometimes you won't. And that's okay when you don't do it, because next time you will.
Mm,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Good advice.
I do have some good stuff sometimes, not all the
I
time.
think I have it more often than not. I had a telephone call with a client earlier this week, and it was a disastrous phone call. And I was in the car. We had a long, disastrous conversation. She was talking over me. At some points, I was talking over her, and it was my inner voice. It was after hours, but she was desperate for the conversation. I had 3 things I needed to tell her before the next day. My agenda simply was communicate these 3 points. Her agenda was something very different. But after, 5 minutes of talking over, and I just thought, Bruce, your agenda, my inner voice was so loud. You're driving anyway. Just shut up. Just shut up and let her talk. She is the client. Just be quiet. And then she said, "Are you even there? Are you still there?" And I said, "I'm here. I just need to hear you, and I was not hearing you before. I'm really sorry. Keep talking, please." And she talked for a long time, but what she had left the messages about was not at all what she needed to talk about. And I was not recognizing at all, because I had my agenda. I was tired. I wanted to get home, and, I just wanted to give these 3 messages about tomorrow. But when that conversation ended, I drove the rest of the way home thinking, what a disastrous interaction with a client. And if I had just taken a breath before I rung, might have been a bit different. Or if I'd recognized earlier, but I know my inner voice was just saying 3 things it's just 3 things. If you just listen, and it was about solving too, all of what you've left me messages about will disappear. It'll be so easy. But I think, and I share it because we often talk about slowing down to speed up in practice. If I had slowed down in that phone call and actually turned my inner voice off and recognized that there was a whole lot of anxiety happening about something completely different for her, we wouldn't have had such a disastrous initial probably 15 minutes of that phone call, where then as a practitioner, you're left feeling pretty shit about yourself and your skills. And then there's some repair work that, I did in that phone call, but I still have to do because it took a long time to build her trust initially. So it is really about slowing down to speed up and recognizing, yes, you can't do this all the time, but if you're just in the everyday of practice, bringing a client back to provide information, it may then be about recognizing they're not in the space to hear that and there's something else happening. And if I could have just turned my inner voice off, I think it would have been a much better interaction, at least for my client.
It's interesting that the thought that goes through my head is that is a great example and a great story. And I don't know if this is possible, so I'm going to make the comment, but I don't know if it would. You will know better than I do whether this would have been possible. But at that moment when you started to think, actually, there's something going on for her, and I'm not going to be able to get my 3 points out, I wonder if that was a moment to then think, I postpone this conversation because it's now more serious. There's something clearly going on for her. I'm driving. I'm not going to be able to listen effectively while I'm driving. This is not the right time for a conversation she clearly needs to have. I wonder if that was a moment to say, actually, we really need to have a chat. I'd love to chat with you. I don't think it's best while I'm driving, and you can probably agree with that. So let's make a time. Let's make an appointment. Then you've got to decide, how important are my 3 things that I've got to get across. Or I wonder if you'd done that and said, let's chat about this tomorrow. And just, by the way, then would she have relaxed a bit, knowing that was going to be heard, and then could you have got your 3 points across? I don't know.
And so we would call that reflexive in practice. And I wasn't reflexive. I was reflective after the fact, but I was not in that moment being reflexive, because that's indeed what I should have done, Ross.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I just kind of
sounds easy in hindsight, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It always does. Reflection, you get all these great shoulda, coulda, but in the moment, being reflexive is pretty tricky anyway, I think, for me. But
very hard.
I'm much better at reflection than reflexiveness.
I think on that note, Ross, I just really want to thank you for joining us.
Oh, you're
today.
Very welcome.
And it would be great if you sent us a link that we can put in our show notes for when this episode comes out. so that other people can access your book, because I think it would be so relatable and applicable to practice.
Yeah.
So I think it would be really useful for people just to have a read and think about listening and communication in general.
Thank you. And obviously I'd love to, and I will definitely do that. So it's pretty easy. rossjudd.com.
All right, rossjudd.com.
You've got a YouTube channel, which is very easy to find too.
Yeah, that's a work in progress. I'm not real good at that sort of stuff. So YouTube channels are work in progress. We're working on it. We're doing a whole bunch of work in the leadership space at the moment, creating a whole bunch of YouTube videos in the leadership space, but that's definitely on the agenda.
If you Google Ross Judd on YouTube, or search, I should say, Ross
you'll get a few
on
different people. But
YouTube, you'll bet you're listening in your book and other podcasts that you've been on, definitely is easy to find, comes up.
Yeah, nice. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
All right, so it sounds like you don't need to send me a thing, so I can just do rossjudd.com.
I'll send it anyway.
All right,
cool. Yeah.
All right. Any last comments for any of us, I guess?
No, I say no, and then I start to make a comment. So I'm sure for me, it's an acknowledgement of the work that you and your listeners do. I think it's really important, and it's easy for me to come from a leadership space where I don't think there's quite as much skin in the game, or there's not as much at stake. It's not personal in the same way. I hope this can help, and I hope there's some concepts in here. And I would say to people, the Bones, who wrote the foreword, his nickname's Bones, he kept saying to me, I don't really like books like this. Thanks. But what I do like is there'll be something in it that helps.
Yeah.
And I like that philosophy. Hopefully there's something in this that helps, whichever thing out of this works and helps. There's a lot in there, and if something out of that helps, then that's great. And I particularly helping people doing the work that you and your listeners are doing. I'd love to. I hope it can help.
That's a great way to end this, I think, because you are so right. It is about accessing as much resources as you can, because there'll always be something that you'll find helpful. Cool.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of Relational Practice, a social work podcast. We hope today's discussion was valuable for your practice.
To ensure you're always in the loop, please follow our podcast. Your subscription and social media engagement also helps us to build our community and make these important conversations more accessible to other social workers.
We really thank you, Ross, for your time today. And to all of our listeners, stay safe and remember to always practice relationally. Thanks for listening. No pun intended.
Thank you.
But maybe